And unless you can figure out a way to be able to pay for the new stuff while you're still servicing clients with the old stuff, you're not going to win at this game. You're not going to win at this game.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we speak with Rick Ferreira, CEO at Innovative Health. And Hayes, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Rick is an absolute legend. He's fun. He's been successful in multiple businesses. So he has a load of information, and I really enjoy his company, and he really has just done a good job for all of us in the industry. So stick around and listen, and I think you'll learn a lot too.
All right. We're going to be right back after a short break.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Garry Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Rick Ferreira, CEO at Innovative Health. And Rick, you and I talked recently, and you introduced me to this concept of greenwashing, which we're going to dive into today. I can't believe this is the first time you've come on the show, but very excited to have you here on Power Supply. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on today, Justin. I appreciate it. Follow you and Hayes and the team all the time, so good to be on with you guys.
Rick is a living legend. I'm so glad you're here. This is fantastic. And so thanks, Rick, for doing this. And this is going to be fun, I know.
So Hayes is right, a living legend. But in case there's anybody that hasn't gotten a chance to know you, Rick, can you talk about your background and give some of your history in healthcare?
Actually, good. Great. Thanks, Justin. So you'll hear from my couple of words that I say. I'm actually not from the States, although I am a citizen now, from Canada. So I say out and about. And for a lot of years, I called it reprocessing, not reprocessing. So I've built a business here in the States back in the late 90s. Actually, was one of the founders of a business called Alliance Medical that became Ascent Healthcare Solutions that was sold to Stryker in 2009. And that business was really about taking devices that were sold as single use and figuring out ways to be able to clean them, function test them, and sell them back to the hospital. So a big cost containment play. We were pioneers in the space, so we've got a lot of scars on our back as the OEMs took us to task on it and went through regulatory environment. But I think today, reprocessing, and I'm back in the space again today, but reprocessing has really become what I would call a community standard of care. And really for hospitals, you're not a good steward of your resource if you're not reprocessing what you can reprocessing. So,
we talk a lot right now about resiliency and sustainability. These are terms that over the last several years they were around before, but I feel like they've taken really a prominent stage in healthcare supply chain, more so than ever before. And I realize the work that you've done around reprocessing is very much in that vein.
Nice.
And I wanted to ask you about HIRC, because this was an organization that you talked to me about when we were touching base ahead of time for the podcast. What is HIRC, or HIRC, I think, as you refer to it? What is HIRC, and what's the focus of the organization?
Well, it's the acronym is HIRC, but it's Healthcare Industry Resilience Collaborative, and it was really formed out of the pandemic I think, to really address the lack of resiliency in healthcare supply chain. If you look at the list of folks that are on there, big players are part of it. Mayo Clinic, one of them. That's actually how we got introduced to it, led by leading U.S. healthcare systems, and really championing and leading standards for best practices around healthcare supply chain resiliency. I think everybody was kind of shocked at what happened during COVID to the supply chain. We're still not recovered from it. But I'll tell you, I think the pandemic made it crystal clear that the supply chain in healthcare is broken. It needs to be fixed, right? We saw it through PPE. We're still seeing it today with shortages around chips that go into the devices, silicone. So we just got to figure out a way for the hospitals to be able to, be more resilient when we hit these things and we get shortages. So I'm glad I'm back in the reprocessing business, because I think that is one of the top resiliency strategies for hospitals, where you're just not relying on brand new devices being built over and over again.
Hey, can I hop in here right fast? Rick, kind of give me an understanding of the size of that industry, the reprocessing industry. In other words, how much of the products, the devices that are out there now are being reprocessed and which ones are not? In other words, where are we in the whole scheme of things?
Yeah, great question. I think the original equipment manufacturers would like you to think that everything's reprocessed. And the truth of the matter is it's a couple of percent of the devices that are made can actually be reprocessed, because three things are key, right? We have to be able to clean that device. So it's got to be a device that you can have easy access to be able to clean it. You've got to be able to function test it so that it performs exactly as the brand new device from the OEM does. And then you've got to be able to sterilize it without compromising the materials the device is made from. So it is a small subset that can be done, but there's still lots of room for growth. I would think today the market's probably $500 million in size here in the US, and it could probably be 3 to 4 billion, maybe even a little bit more. But again, it's tightly controlled by the FDA, so it's not all devices. I mean, the things that we went through, and Justin, you had some experience with me in this back in the old days, but infection control is not even really an issue now, because they understand the standards that the FDA has put in front of us. The manufacturers, I will tell you, back in the 90s, tried to regulate us out of business. They actually regulated us in business, which, but for their pushing, we probably wouldn't have ended up in a 510K scheme with FDA, and it's actually helped our business. And another good point to make, and again, you were there in the early days, Justin, every single hospital in the U.S. World of News report reprocessed something within their facility on the device side. So it's not like it's you're doing what? It's almost like you look at, I had somebody the other day ask me on a call, well, who's actually doing this? And I said, it'd probably be a shorter list to tell you who's not.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, Rick, just a quick follow-up to that. I remember back in the day when we used to do the inventory counts and be in the supply chain operations, and you'd have the OEM in one bin and you'd have the reprocessing one in the same bin or right next to each other. Has the doctors and the surgeons and the nurses and the clinical teams actually choosing them more now? Are they more accommodating to say, this is okay, this has met the clearance? Are they capturing it better now?
Yeah, I think the answer to the question, Gary, is yes. But I think what you're really seeing is healthcare systems that use reprocessing as a strategy are doing exactly what you said. The ones that are doing it transactional still don't get it, right? At a lot of the leading healthcare systems, reprocessing is first on the shelf. Even when they're doing ordering, they go to reprocess the number first. And then if reprocessing can't fill it, they then go down to the OEM. But it's a lot different than it is today. We just don't get the good thing about physicians is they're scientists. And there's so much science behind reprocessing. It's very difficult for them to refute doing it unless they just don't want to do it.
Absolutely. Another question too. Are you finding that it is a rep model or is it a hybrid model? There's so many different teams that I see involved. It could be EVS, it could be facilities, transporting it, getting on the dock, supply chain involved, the clinical teams. Is it a rep model based coming in, or is it more supply chain pushing it through? What are you seeing? Or is it a hybrid of both?
It's a hybrid of both. I mean, everywhere's a little bit different. I was on a call last week with a large health system, and the CFO was actually leading the discussion. And, then I was on a call with a local large system here in Arizona, and I was dealing with supply chains. Everywhere's a little bit different, but I think what is different today and has the wind at our back on this business and all the cost containment stuff we're involved in is there's only two things hospitals really control. Their labor costs and their supply costs. That's it. I mean, we can talk about payer mix and procedure mix. They control two things, labor and supply costs. And right now, labor is so unwieldy for everybody, heightened at the hospital level. So if you're really looking to make an impact, you got to go to the supply chain. And stuff's just got to cost less. It's just got to cost less.
Rick, can you give me a feel for what that cost difference is? I mean, I know it's probably varied, but are we talking 5%? Are we talking 50%? Where does that fall?
Yeah, the range is about 40 to 70% of what they would pay for the device from the OEM. So it is a significant savings.
Yeah.
But you start looking at catheters. I mean, my business now is I'm just in cardiology on the reprocessing side of it, but we're saving some hospitals $1,500 per catheter. $1,500 per catheter.
Yeah.
Do you find that a lot of this, too, the movement towards single use was also just being able to look at it on a per case basis when they were doing their analysis, like the ease of the finances? Like, all right, this is what this costs us per case. And so it just buttons up nicely in the way that they look at their costs.
I think when single use first started, what got me into this business was in Canada, because it's a government pay system. And I'm not advocating for a government pay system, but single use devices were not sold there. The same devices that were sold here in the United States were sold in Canada with cleaning instructions. And, I've had the fortune or misfortune. We've been sued 4 times in this business, 3 times by U.S. Surgical. And what killed them in their case was they were claiming about patient safety and their brand and everything else that we were affecting it. But yet in Canada, they were selling the exact same product with cleaning instructions. So, I actually find it funny, the fight that we had through the 90s and early 2000s to now the 2 largest reprocessors are owned by medical device companies. Stryker, the business that we sold, and Johnson & Johnson owns SterilMed. So, if you can't beat them, join them.
Exactly.
But, it's the hospitals that you guys all know, and I've listened to your show multiple times. Supply chains the hospitals that are really surviving now are the ones that use supply chain as a strategy and not just a department that buys stuff.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Yes.
I mean, I still laugh when people say, yeah, I can't reprocess that because I got free capital equipment. You didn't get free capital equipment. You're paying more for the devices to offset the capital equipment. But, again, sophisticated supply chains sit down and they do the calculation because it may be worth your while to not reprocess. But somebody should be doing the math, right? If I buy the capital equipment outright, but I reprocess, what does that delta look like? And does it make sense for me to do it? But I'm amazed when people say, oh no, I'm getting free capital.
Nothing's free. Well, what about
embedded leases? Yeah, embedded leases. Here we come. Yeah.
What about the whole ESG movement? Has that helped this space a lot?
Good point. Hayes, today, almost and I'm talking about the large health systems, everybody has an environmental coordinator, environmental sustainability.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And I'll tell you, people laughed at me back in 2000, 2001, when we started to use the phrase environmental and financial sustainability. Like, what is environmental sustainability? Right. And everybody's talking about it now. We're major systems. I think here in Phoenix, every healthcare system has a sustainability coordinator. But again, until I think some real regulation comes into play, and I don't like government intervention where they're actually pushing people to do this, they're not going to do it. The manufacturers still today are at a conflict, right? The guys they're selling to are losing money and their prices are increasing.
It's a dilemma for sure. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
and we keep coming up with new technologies, new iterations of technology that either don't improve the patient outcome or they marginally do. And again, I think the whole value analysis teams that were started back in 2000, those made sense back then. Now they're not really even doing the analysis anymore. It should be, if I'm buying new technology, where's my value? Am I getting a better patient outcome? Am I getting better patient satisfaction? And if I'm not, I shouldn't be buying that new technology.
So you said 40 to 70% savings, and Hayes talked about the environmental sustainability. And I think you did a really nice job of connecting resiliency and sustainability, like this focus on resiliency. But I want to talk about just the impact on the environment. So now we understand the financial impacts of, the single-use device reprocessing market is one example, not the only example, right? But one example. And we know that identifying, parts and raw materials, like that all comes in to resiliency from the supply and demand. But I really want to connect this to where Hayes was going with it. Like, what's the impact on the environment? And, I think that also brings us to the greenwashing term, if you want to start there, because I think that's a new term. But what is greenwashing, and what are some of the improvements or the positive impacts that we can have on the environment by really focusing and intending to reduce, the impacts on our environment?
Well, you gave me a lot to unpack there, brother. So let me.
Justin is always long-winded. Justin is always long-winded. So we know you have to really pay attention because there's like 8 questions in one sentence. It's amazing.
If he was a lawyer, they wouldn't get off the witness stand with one question.
But he would charge a lot.
He would charge a lot.
I'd win a lot of cases.
Yes, he would. He would.
There's a ton of evidence out there and research that's been done on carbon emissions, right? So if you look at a new device versus a reprocessed device, it doubles. And I can send you guys a study for you to read on your own, but is double what it is for reprocessing. So so you talk about reducing the carbon footprint, it's cost you twice as much in carbon footprint to make a brand new device than it does to reuse the device that was made. And think about everything that goes through with it, right? Making of the plastic for the resins for the plastic, the packaging, all those things. So there's enough evidence to support that makes sense. Another good fact that I'm sure you guys know about, the number one contributor to the landfill is the food services. Number 2 is hospitals.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Right on.
Number 2. Interesting. Okay.
Right. So when you talk about what are you actually, this is what I talk about with, I don't think government regulation is always important. I think they need to be pushing these hospitals. And what are you guys really doing about that? Right? What are you doing around all the blue wrap that goes into the landfill? So there's no doubt that this has a huge environmental benefit. But I think, Justin, the 5th question you asked in the same question, 5C, 2 little I, was greenwashing, right? So there's been so much talk about going green out there that the medtech industry really they can't avoid it, right? It's front and center. We just won a contract award with a large system in California, and they actually had an environmental scorecard that they completed for you. And you're going to see more and more people go down that path, right? But here's the unfortunate thing, right? Going green actually will have some short-term impact on your profits if you're the OEM. And you go back to HERC that we talked about at the start of the show, right? The Healthcare Industry Resiliency Collaborative. Major corp, go look on the website, see everybody that's on there. And there's kind of 3 levels or 3 areas that you need to be focused on to be what HERC considers to be fully engaged. And you guys saw our press release on it. With all those large companies that are out there, there's one company in the United States that's listed as fully engaged in resiliency by HERC, and it's Innovative Health. I mean, that's a shame. When you've got major corporations being involved, and they haven't even checked the box on one of the 3 categories yet. Now, I laughed. I saw one of the large companies did a press release about how they're working on resiliency. They've increased the inventories in their warehouse by $500 million. All that means is I have more stuff to sell you when you need it, right? That's not what resiliency means. And now, it helps with product shortfall, right? But it costs money to be green, and it's a short-term hit to your profit margin. And these guys have to report to Wall Street, most of them every 90 days. So it's tough to say, hey, I took a hit in my Q3 results because I did all these initiatives to go green. So I think the hospitals have to continue to demand it, and they will. I mean, I think they need to continue to push on it. But greenwashing is this, that press release by that company that said they increased their inventories by $500 million. That's greenwashing. Because somebody may look at that and go, oh, they're being resilient. No, they're not. They're making more of the same product that they're selling, so they got more stuff to sell you. Right? Resiliency is around things like We're doing new packaging. It's got less plastic in it, or we're recycling our plastic. We're going to collect blue wrap from the hospitals and turn it into something. All that stuff costs money.
You know, it's interesting, Rick, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for this a little bit, but I remember some areas where they used to just take extra product and just throw it, and people could take it and use it in plastic and call it a dog box, call it whatever you want. Those are the areas where we need that resiliency. That's where we need it. We need those bits and pieces to go to these companies like Herc. I was just looking at the Herc website while we were talking, just to keep me in line at the same page. There's a worksheet there that is amazing on the mapping piece that I'm like, we need to be involved in this. I mean, you get me all fired up on this. I've seen multiple companies through my operations world that I've seen the three that I was thinking of. You mentioned two. I know there's three of them, and I've been down all those roads, and I've seen them, and the adaptability of it, where it's at. We've got to be there. There's those two pieces, and you said it loud and clear. Contracted labor, we're in such an issue right now. We can't look at that right now. We've got to go after all the non-contracted labor, purchase services, all in this pieces of supply chain where we're at, Rick. I'm 100% on board with you, and we've got to figure out ways to do this. And you just bringing up these bits and pieces is just huge right now.
I know you guys had one of my colleagues, another business that we're involved in called ScanPro on a while ago. And you look at what that company's doing around stuff that's being thrown in the mission box, right? They're throwing robotic arms in there for the mission box. Most places you go on a mission, guess what, boys? They don't have a robot.
No.
Right?
They don't. They're in them.
Right. They're taking, and the manufacturer should be saying, hey, supply chain, I'm seeing all this stuff that you guys are you buying too much? But it's almost like, let me sell it to the hospital, and if it expires on the shelf, it's the hospital's issue. It's all of our issues. And I think for healthcare to survive, and I've been saying this since I've been in the business, everybody has to act and behave differently. Us as constituents using the services, us as providers providing services, and guys and people like me that are selling services to the hospital. We all have to act and behave differently. You know that since the pandemic hit, we have never done a price increase in our business. And guess what? Everything's costing me more today. My Tyvek pouch is costing me more. My testing services are costing me more. My labor's costing me more. I didn't push a price increase through. Because you know what? I got to eat it. The guy I'm selling to is in trouble. Yet we see all these OEMs coming out of the pandemic. What are they doing? Price increases. You were just at the Visiting Conference in Vegas. These guys are all pushing through price increases. And they're not being transparent in why they need it. Everybody agrees that stuff costs more today. Everybody does. But if for years, I don't know what your true costs have been. Like if they said to them, listen, here's what our real costs are. Here's how much I'm making. My cost just went up 10%. As partners, we're going to split it. I'm going to eat 5 and you hospital will take it. The hospitals wouldn't argue with it. But all of a sudden now you're getting price increases pushed back at you. And we even heard from a large system, they're getting price increases pushed them on back-ordered stuff they ordered 18 months ago off of a price list, and they're being asked to pay more for it. So, we haven't done a price increase, and we won't. Because I know I have to make less money now because the guy I'm selling to is making less money.
Well, Rick, just having that proactive collaboration with your entities you work with is step one. I mean, the corporate letter coming out and you have a 5.7% price increase, those days are gone. Just having a corporate letter that you have a price increase, reach out, have a communication, support the mission, patient-centered, focused model. It's about our staff and it's about people. So I love what you're talking about.
But it is a dilemma. I will say this, at our 2 recent meetings, we had a very large capital equipment company, and they were talking, they were saying, hey, Mr. CEO, we haven't increased prices in, 3 years, and now we need to. And meanwhile, the CEOs were saying, you can, give us a higher price. We're just not going to pay it. And so it's just really this rub that's going on. And I obviously I don't know where it's going to end, but clearly, Rick, I like your, the way you're thinking about it. You've got to suck it up for a little bit. And of course, they're going to remember that. I think it'll come back in spades later on.
Yeah. At the end of the day, listen, we're all selling to the same customers, right? So I'm not developing any new customers. We're not building more hospitals. Interesting phenomenon we're seeing. And I think it's going to help our business. EP procedures now are being pushed out to surgery centers. And guess who the owners of the surgery centers are? or at least partners, the doctors. Guess who at the surgery centers wants to reprocess everything?
Of course they do.
If they weren't already doing it themselves.
Working in a hospital is a very, very difficult job. And maybe another supply chain podcast would be around the anatomy of the buyer. What's going on in the people that we're selling to every day, right? Most of the guys in the hospital, and this is not, they're under so much pressure. They're looking to get through the day they started. They're not looking at what's going to happen 12 months down the road, right? And it's difficult for them when they look at, do I do a new program? What am I really working on? And it's difficult because the supply chain role today is like the old OR nursing days. Remember, it was the worst job in the hospital was being an OR nurse. Right? I think the worst job now is being a supply chain person.
Yeah.
The CFO needs to save money. He's not walking to the chief of compliance or the chief medical officer. He's walking to the supply chain and say, hey, spend 10% less.
Yeah.
Well, and Rick, and a lot of people are leaving to go to industry, right? So the hospitals are, in a lot of cases, training some of the best talent of tomorrow, but then they don't keep them. And so that puts them in a really difficult position too.
Yeah, it's clear with what's going on that, the linear product consumption models are just not sustainable because they've got problems in terms of the environment, supply chain vulnerability, and then just in costs.
Well, so the alternative is a circular economy solution, which I'm assuming reprocessing is, but can you define those two terms, like linear production / consumption model and circular economy? I think it's inherent, but I just want to make sure we got people at all different levels. Define that for the audience.
Remember, we've got Garry on this, so he definitely needs some clarification here.
You know what? I'm from Idaho. Why you got to make fun of me? I spent time in Saskatoon and Regina and Moose Jaw up in Canada. Come on now, give me some leeway.
But hey, to give him his props, though, he does have 2 MBAs, so that's the reason. More importantly, you probably need to explain this to him.
It's 3 now. Go ahead, please, Rick. Please.
Let me hit on the circular economy first. So. A circular economy solution really implies that instead of throwing away products after each use, we design products so that they can be reused. We reprocess products after use so that they can be reused, or at the very least, recycle components from it. I mean, that's just the start of it, right? If everything in that device that I built, everything, the packaging, the components, everything is thrown away after I use the case, I don't have a circular economy. What was part 3 of your question again?
It was only a comparison of linear production and circular economy. I was very strategic to be pointed on this one.
You were good, Justin.
He was scared. He's gun shy.
Well, I think what I would tell you is that the circular economy discussion is the answer to the problem that's created by the linear consumption model, right?
Right.
It's the difference between using it once and throwing it away, and figuring out what else you can do with that product after it's been used to reuse it again. And the challenge that we've got with the hospital folks, and they're under pressure. They really don't have time to. I remember speaking to a guy who worked at a large device company. They had a whole department of analysts back in the 2004, 2005 that all they did was look at pricing. Most hospitals' contracting department, if they're lucky, they've got one analyst that actually is taking a good look behind the numbers. Right. So it becomes right. I just talked to a guy that worked at a system in Dallas, and he's got 36 bids going on right now that he's ultimately responsible for. Now, Gary, you know that, but how can you do it? You can't
manage it.
What happens is I'll end up signing a contract that gives me great pricing on the stuff I don't buy. So I think, oh God, I got a great contract on here. And then the new there was a great article that just came out that was it was either an EP Lab Digest or one of the cardiovascular journals, where a physician said, we just can't afford the new technology anymore. We just can't. And unless you can figure out a way to be able to pay for the new stuff while you're still servicing clients with the old stuff, you're not going to win at this game. You're not going to win at this game. We joke, and I don't see enough pushback at the hospital level calling out the bad behavior of the original equipment manufacturers. I joke a little bit like it's the Stockholm syndrome, right? After a while, you fall in love with your kidnapper, and he's just the greatest guy in the world.
That's good.
Is that a Kevin Bacon movie that I saw years ago? I'm having like a this flashback. There we go.
You think about bundling for a second. It still goes on in your own household, Gary. Cox is your cable provider. They come and say, "Hey, I know you love ESPN, but if you want ESPN now, you have to pay for it in the bundle, an extra $100. You would go somewhere else and get it, right? You would go somewhere else and get it. And as a result, new industries are formed. Whoever would have thought 20 years ago, everybody would be watching TV on their computer, right? Look what's happening in streaming services now. You really don't even need TV anymore.
You can get Thursday night football without a certain area.
But you have to realize that Gary's into Nickelodeon and not ESPN. So there's a difference there.
But you and your Barney.
Barney. That's nothing wrong with Barney. But the overall picture here, Rick, I mean, obviously you're a company, you're doing well, and you're doing your thing, you're profitable, you've got all those things going on, and there are others out there, but not many. But to your point, a lot of these OEM companies, they're set in this, public markets piece. They've got 90-day quarters they have to make. But what's the answer? Is it the large systems? Is it the largest of the largest push back and say, we're not doing business with this anymore? What's it going to take to move this industry forward?
It's going to take exactly that. It's going to take somebody that stands up and says, we're not doing it anymore. And I think years ago, when they were Novation, before they became Vizient, they moved $40 million in business overnight from one of the big OEMs who was misbehaving, and now they're back in check. I would have told you 10 years ago, guys, you were better off having one supplier in a line because you had leverage with that person. I will tell you, I was dead wrong. You're better off to spread the work out across the board because they won't behave badly. If you have somebody, and I see it firsthand in the EP lab, right? The people that we battle every day, it's not the other reprocessors. It's the largest player in the EP space. And they behave the worst in the accounts where they have 85% market share, or in some cases more. And the accounts that are spread out, that are using all three of the major players, they behave well because they don't want to lose that share that they've got.
And Rick, I think I'm going to make a comment. So what we've learned during the pandemic, I want your opinion on this. What we've learned down the pandemic time frame, the last 2 years, is a sole source agreement, an 85% agreement, a 90% agreement doesn't work anymore. And the diversity that we have to have among suppliers now, they have to come to the table with a reprocessing piece to it. Don't you agree? I mean, that's where it's got to go. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a check the box. You have to have a reprocess. You have to be reprocessing what I'm buying from you, or I'm not going to do it. But I would maintain a different way to go. It is not, and again, in Canada, because the government pays, it's all play. And they just set the bid, the capitated model. We're going to buy 10,000 hips at this price. If you want it, hit it.
I love
and you'll get a share.
I love capitate. I'm a capitated guy. I like that. I mean, we can explain that, Hayes, on another podcast if you got time, but we're not going to go into it. But I love that model. It's a great model.
We had an orthopedic business, consulting business a while back, helping hospitals through bundle payment. And it was amazing to me. We would go into some hospitals and the only key for the implant room was in the pocket of the OEM rep. The staff couldn't even get in and get it. And then they wonder why their costs are going up. One of the big manufacturers they came up with this model that, hey, men and women are different. So we should have a man's knee and a female knee. So they did that, and guess what? It was more expensive for that. So you get and what they found out over time is it didn't make a difference. We did a lot of work with one of the major orthopedic hospitals in the country, and a lot of things make a difference in a patient outcome on a hip or knee replacement. The one thing that doesn't make a difference? The implant that was used. Yet we spend all of our time bashing around on the implant, right? How the patient presents themselves for surgery, comorbidities, are they going back to a skilled nursing facility after? What's the strength of the surgeon that did it? All those things make a difference. What do we spend all of our time on? Better implants, more expensive implants.
Wow. Gary's speechless.
Yeah.
That's kind of, that says something right there.
No, I love it.
You know how I know this was an excellent interview?
Yeah.
This was an excellent interview because Hayes and Garry, for the first podcast ever, did more question asking and discussion than I did. I felt like Hayes on this one.
But wait, Justin, you asked one question that had, well, I should say, you had a statement that War and Peace in there. And so
now you know the method to my madness. I could tell I better get it all out at once.
But think about it for a second, guys. Patient registries, right, on outcomes. Aren't you amazed at a place like the United States of America We don't have big patient registries. Yet in places in the UK,
yeah.
Australia, they've got them. You know why? Because the government wants to know what the outcomes are.
Why are all our trials done across the OTO
sense.
instead of in the States?
And I would maintain the reason there's not registries here is if I'm a guy selling devices, I don't want my data out there, because what if the registry says my outcomes aren't any better and yet I'm twice as expensive? Then what happens?
Rick, I mean, there's so many head-to-head studies. I mean, come on now. There's so many head-to-head studies. No.
Yeah, they don't want them. They don't want them. And then it makes it difficult for smaller players to come to the market with a solution because they don't have the whole solution. I see it in my business. If you use reprocessed catheters, I won't sell you this. You guys know today, I have litigation going on against Biosense Webster for restraint of trade in the EP space over this exact same issue.
Rick, I want to ask one more question that I put in the chat with Hayes and Justin quite a while ago. Is HERC global, U.S.? What's the footprint?
U.S.
Okay.
It's U.S.
Okay. No, I appreciate that.
Is it necessary abroad? Is that part of the reason it's only U.S. based?
I really don't know the whole. We were not one of the founding members. We came in through the as the process was developed, and I think maybe Justin, you could probably show. It's like you can't eat the elephant all in one bite, right? So I think if you can show that it works here and you've got a system that works and the companies adhere to and they all engage in, you could then take it out to be a national standard. But if you go through and look at the standards you've got to hit, a lot of the stuff is basic, right? How could a small company like me become fully engaged it took us 8 or 9 months because we were focused on it, right? And we spent the money to make it happen.
All right. Last question then on that, since you teed it up so nicely. What are some of those, key areas that you have to be able to hit that you were able to do in 8 or 9 months?
Well, you have to do your whole mapping process, right? Which took us a long time. Where you got to map all your suppliers that you're buying from, because it does no good for me if I'm focused on reducing carbon footprint if everybody I'm buying from is not.
That's a really good point. It actually ties into an interview we did recently, about suppliers, managing their suppliers and kind of looking at that next level, because that transparency doesn't really hit the hospital, right, Rick? And so you'd almost need an organization like this to sort of validate that, because it's what's happening behind the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz otherwise.
And just to finish off on Gary's point, so I think it was Gary that asked the question, but so it is here in the U.S., but it really is using some international sourcing for information as well, right? So it's not like we're not looking at the rest of the world, because some of the other parts of the world have some pretty good standards in place. It's really how do we apply it here? And to your point, there's kind of 3 things, Justin, right? It's transparency, the ability to be able to map your suppliers, and then how are you doing on your resiliency scorecard?
Rick, phenomenal interview. This one flew right by, and I think you're right. This is a major focus for the future of medical device. And I think it's been talked about for a long time, but I don't know that we've really placed the appropriate focus. And I do want to call everybody out. HIRC is HERC. So definitely go learn more about the organization. Consider your own organization's commitment to resiliency and sustainability. And Rick, once again, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, boys. I appreciate what you guys are doing. Love the show.
You guys were great. You were great, Rick, and we didn't have to bleep you one time.
All right, that was Rick Ferreira, CEO at Innovative Health, and we talked about a number of topics, Garry, and he introduced the concept of greenwashing, and I think he really put a call out there, put your money where your mouth is, and introduced us to HERC, which is the Healthcare Industry Resilience Collaborative. You can actually visit the website by going to HERCstrong.com. That's HIRC strong.com. And looking at linear production versus circular economy solutions like single-use device reprocessing, something to think about. But I know we said this already, but I just feel like we've been talking about sustainability for a long time, but the resiliency component was driven forward by the pandemic. And I'm not sure that the relationship between the two in terms of real impact on the environment and also our sustainability as supply chain in healthcare has really been pushed totally forward yet. And I think there's a lot of opportunity still here.
I think you're exactly right. Rick brought the point home. Sustainability has really walked the walk. Things are changing. If we haven't learned anything from the last 2 to 3 years, we're at the mercy of our healthcare systems being in the red for a very, very long time. This whole linear production and the raw material shortages, we've got to get to the next concept that Rick talked about so in depth, and his knowledge of reprocessing and greenwashing and where we've got to go, I think was spot on. And just the knowledge to share that and go to her, take a look at it. I think it really supports the U.S. and what we're trying to do on our footprint thus far. But Rick's concepts and his knowledge was amazing, Justin. I thought he did a great job. And man, Rick is a wealth of knowledge. Just a great honor to have him on our podcast.
Yeah, real great business sense and putting everything into perspective that way today, too. I do want to remind everyone that you can follow Power Supply on LinkedIn or even on Facebook, but also the best way to listen to the show is by downloading our smartphone app for iPhone or Android. We've got some episodes that have bonus content, but you won't get it unless you download the app. Of course, if you prefer to listen to podcasts on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts, we're there. We're on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and actually, if you just search for Power Supply Podcast on your favorite podcast application, you'll find us there as well. We also really appreciate feedback. So if you've got ideas for guests or topics for a future show, we'd love to hear from you. Or maybe there's something that we talked about that you want to get additional information or even get connected with one of our guests. You can just send an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. On behalf of Garry, Hayes, and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply.